those things that there may be like more of an emphasis on just looking internally and less looking outwards. Stop aspiring to be something that you are and try and work on what you are in the first place. I'm not telling you not to get muscles. I'm not trying to find like dress yourself up or put on makeup or whatever like that. Look as best as you can, but just be aware that we are living in a world that's playing with your brain, and you're not on a playing ground anymore. You're not going to go out to the club on a fucking Saturday night and find, Jennifer Lawrence standing at the bar.
Oh, yeah.
So, if only. Fingers crossed.
I guess
nightclubs are open.
He'll be in Bristol in 2 weeks' time. Yeah, might find her. Yeah,
Jennifer.
It probably also do something for you to like unfollow Jennifer. It would probably also do something for you to like unfollow these people on like social media.
This week, I am going to move it on quite a little bit because I'm wanting to talk about the standard of beauty in the West and how that's portrayed in media and how basically that's exposed to us, which is a pretty weird one, man. It's not something that certainly it's not something that you or I talk about a huge degree when it comes to aesthetics or looks or trends or beauty. Like, as probably the viewers of the earlier episodes saw, we are not inclined that way.
This episode,
this episode wasn't it just last week where your brother was looking at you and said, "You're not going to the gym wearing that, are you?" Like, yeah, like it's not something that we think about that way.
Yeah, to be honest, it's never a pressure that I've particularly felt. I see people,
right,
I see people talking about like the rise in standards on like Instagram. People like, you hear about people feeling the pressure to look good. I've just never experienced it myself. I've always just kind of like accepted the way I look. That's not to say I've been happy about it. I've not. I don't ever look at myself and think, "Oh, you look good," but like also never been like what. I've never been like worried about it.
Yeah. I know what you mean. I think I'm very much the same way as you when it comes to this, which I thought, well, it could potentially be an interesting one for us to discuss this, because we're very much coming from this as outsiders. Basically, when it comes to this topic, to give a tiny little bit of background, it's pretty fucking self-explanatory. But I'll explain why I want to talk about it. Because you have this what we call a standard of beauty, and it turns out this is basically what people's like perception of attractive traits are in people. It's pretty obvious, and in the West it's been the same for like several decades. It changes from decade to decade, but typically guys are like tall, dark and handsome, pretty standard, and women big bum, big boobs, big lips type of thing. These are somewhat standard, and it's been like that for fucking donkey's years. The reason I thought this would be quite applicable to the guide and like maybe worth us discussing and trying to have a crack at discussing it is because I wanted to think about how aspects of the modern world actually may end up affecting this perception and maybe some of the ramifications of that. And it kind of came about because I was thinking about how for a long time now, it feels within our lives, maybe up to like 10 years, since like the entirety of this like woke, more progressive understanding movement has really birthed itself, there's always been a cry out from people against representations of people and understanding of beauty in media. And this started back in the early 2000s. People, particularly women, they started looking at the advertisements they were seeing and the celebrities they were seeing on TV and the women they were seeing in movies, and they said, this is a bullshit representation. This is not representative. This is unachievable for people's beauty. And also there was huge problems with representation as well. Not only were these things unachievable, like having this hourglass figure and like big puffy lips type of thing, also it was like predominantly white women in these roles that we were seeing in like the mainstream media. So before we start talking about like beauty standard in any more detail, I'm curious, like, going from what we said at the beginning, can you see how this could be a potentially important issue for people? Like, as you said, you've talked about how you hear people talking about like insecurity and stuff like that. How big of an issue do you think self-image is in our world?
Huge, probably massive. I mean, I think when I say that I've never looked at myself in terms of like how attractive I am, that's never something that's like worried me. But I guess how people perceive me in general is that is quite a big concern, and maybe it doesn't always have to be like your face value attractiveness, but like
your style.
Yeah, like going through high school, like I was always really worried about being funny for some reason. Like I always wanted to be like the funny guy of the group. I wanted to like make jokes, and like for a long time, whether people thought I was funny or not was like a big deal to me. Like if people didn't think I was funny, it was like almost like a dent to my ego, you know. It was like my thing, you know. It was like,
Yeah.
and I guess that's an aspect of like self-image.
Definitely.
When we're talking about the more, I guess the more standardized piece of self-image, we're talking about like actual image, like how you look.
Sure. Uh-huh.
I can understand why I don't feel the pressure, because I think that's a pressure that's almost, and I don't, not exclusively, but predominantly for women, because I think when it comes to like sexual attraction, looks is much more of a big deal for men than it is for women.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think the science on that is like disputed. So like I think men are like very visually attracted to women, whereas women are more interested in things like competence and like how successful you are, and like how, I don't know,
Humor.
how dominant a person you are, like your attractive like personality sort of thing, which
Mm-hmm.
I think women are just a bit deeper than men like that. But you can also kind of see how that might be the case, because men, like when people have children, women kind of get like bogged down for like 9 months. You know, when a woman has a child, she really has to be selective about who she like procreates with, because it only happens a few times in her life, whereas a man could procreate as much as he wants and like
Sure.
just piss off. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that could happen. So you can see how women would have to be more selective and how they would feel more pressure about their self-image.
Yeah. You've hit a good point straight off the bat there, and I think you're definitely right. When it comes to self-image and the whole perception of beauty and standards in the media and what we see and what we're exposed to, it definitely to me feels like there is a greater pressure on women when it comes to how they look. And I don't exactly know where that comes from. I don't know if that's because women feel that pressure, therefore it manifests itself, or maybe it's like one of those things where guys, we like, you tend to find that guys don't give a shit about what you're wearing, you know, like fucking you and I, we don't, it's not like I'll ever say, oh nice top there buddy type of thing, you know, like I fucking, you had a haircut there and I was like, Scott had a haircut, interesting, you know, tucked it away there, but I didn't say anything type of thing. It's just,
Yeah.
it seems to be one of those things with guys where it is a lot less conscious, you know. And I actually we just briefly mentioned this before we started recording there. I have looked into studies and that type of thing where there are biological reasons that women are more focused on these type of attributes to do with men, you know, because like exactly like you said, they're only going to have a couple opportunities to have a kid. Every single one of those really counts. So when it comes to being picky and being choosy and being analytical of how you appear, definitely women are much more attuned to this. And the way that this becomes a problem is because exactly like we were saying there, it leads to these scenarios in which many people, I think women more in comparison to men, end up inevitably drawing comparisons between themselves and what they're exposed to. From what I understand, the whole concept of a standard, a beauty standard, is like an amalgamation of what people are being exposed to at the time, as well as a big mix of like cultural and societal and time, you know, time things that are all going into it. So we have this effect where people are being shown what they're shown, and like people are really hyper receptive to that. 1 second. Right. And this is where the problems start getting introduced, is because this is where, as I said, this is where eventually it starts with like insecurity, and you look at yourself and you don't understand why you don't look like what other people want to see, leads to like mental illness, and eventually it can lead to much worse scenarios. I personally, actually, I knew a guy, it was one of my like, close friends in high school, he had problems with self-image, and it was exactly this same route that it seems so many people seem to go down. You read about it in the news all the time. They'll be sitting on their phones and they'll have people that they aspire to, people that they very much look outward to, and compare themselves. And he was always complaining about, you know, his muscles and how much weight he had. He was complaining about his teeth. He complained about his hair. And it eventually actually came out that he developed bulimia. He did end up developing a mental problem just due to his exposure to what he saw other people's and what he expected in himself and the way that he thought he should look. So this does seem like a really relevant issue, and I can really understand why you do see articles about it all the time in the newspaper. Well, in the newspaper, in the news itself. Where the fuck that came from?
The Vulgar Herald, yeah. You're getting the tabloid these days. You open it up and it's like bulimia.
Yeah. I know, primary school kids struck again. I know, that was a really, really bold one.
Justin Trudeau, I'm sorry.
We're sorry. So, I guess my next question is that the whole reason I wanted to talk about this is because we have this movement where we're currently living in a climate where people are actively pushing towards representation and fairer standards that they're seeing. Do you think since the world has become more aware and since we've become more thoughtful and considered and trying to move towards equality, that we have seen a difference with representation in media when it comes to one, the how attainable attraction is and how realistic, and two, representation?
Yes, I think we have seen a shift. However, I only think we've seen a shift to the proportion in which it sells to see a shift.
Sure,
So
okay.
back when you're talking about the early 2000s, first of all, we're talking about people that kind of struggle with their self-image and they see things like this. I think when I think about it, and you're talking about a guy who did it at high school, and obviously there are guys that have these issues as well. When I think about it, I think about it as like a feminine issue because, like we're talking about, like, because I think men are they're so visually inclined to be attracted to someone, whereas women are sort of less visually attracted and they're more interested in like deeper traits.
Yeah.
Being like sexually attractive visually is far more important for a woman than it is for a guy, because that's what men look for. Like surely you would think that women tailor themselves towards what men look for and men tailor themselves towards what women look for. So like
Perhaps subconsciously.
subconsciously, sure. So it's like less of a priority for men to like look really good if they can be successful, if they can be funny, if they can make up for it in other areas, because that's what women look for.
Okay.
But like for when men look at more, it's more pressure for a woman to be like sexually attractive because that's the kind of thing that men look for. That's generally speaking,
Yeah, of course.
So when I think about how like standards have upgraded, you look back at like the early 2000s and it was like purely like the optimal sexually attractive like person. You think back to like the actors back in the day,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
really like sexy attractive people, like I don't know,
Like boy bands and girl bands and that type of thing. Like Take That, fucking
yeah,
S Club 7 and a lot. It's a bunch of young, attractive, traditional people.
like all the Bond girls and stuff like that, and like all the actors that do play James Bond are like really attractive men. So it's like you can see that. I think over the last like, especially over the last 5-10 years, there's probably been a bigger representation, especially when it comes to modeling. I feel like I see a lot of like plus size models now, which I think is good because it sort of promotes like a bigger range of body issues. I mean, there's probably something to be said for like promoting obesity and stuff like that. I get like plus size models where it's like natural sort of body shapes.
Yeah,
But
maybe not selling obesity.
yeah,
But
when you're promoting like
not
obesity,
skinny.
that's probably not what we're like talking about. But
Yeah.
I think we're seeing that shift because of the complaints, though. Like because sex sells, I think that's like established, and that's why it was like that in the first place. And then people started to realize that was like unobtainable, so they complained about it. So companies like changed so that they could like still get away with like what they were doing, but also appear to be representative. So they changed as much as was required to continue to sell whatever it was they were selling, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what I mean because that was pretty much what I wrote down for my thought on this topic. Like when it comes to the changes that we've seen, there's been like really really vocal changes, and one of the ones that do stick out to me is like Vogue magazine. It's because like the Vogue magazine, it used to be traditional, really skinny, willowy white woman with fucking freakishly long giraffe necks type of thing, and that's all you ever saw there for decades. And now there are huge degrees of people with like darker skin colors and people that aren't traditionally skinny and that type of thing. So in modeling and fashion, definitely there's been quite a large embrace of encouraging non-standard beauty types, which is I think a brilliant thing, and that's not only in terms of how achievable it is, but also in terms of like the shape, size, and colors. Although when it comes to pretty much every other aspect of media, and I always think of films when it comes to this one, it's one where I feel that there's like now instead of having like a varied cast, they'll have a bunch of beautiful people and one ugly. you know, and that's the representation. That'll keep the fucking crowds happy, you know. And then we're just gonna have a normal cast of people, and we'll hire our standard two black side friends. We'll get one gay couple in the film, you know, and that's it's almost feels like it's become like pandering
A
and
checky box
cheaper that way.
exercise, yeah.
Exactly, it's like it does feel like as if they're checking their boxes, and it's that was the main takeaway. Is because unfortunately we're caught in this loop where people start complaining that they don't have enough representation in their films, or they feel that representation is unfair or wrong to some extent. But these people that are complaining about it, unfortunately, are also the same people that consistently buy sex. You know, it's like, for instance, it's just a rule now that see films that come out, they do better if they have attractive cast members. You know, every single Disney movie you see now, all the new characters are predominantly young and like physically fucking epitomize whatever race that they come from. You know, it feels like this huge saturation, and I don't know how this problem is ever going to disconnect itself. We're never ever going to find ourselves in a world that has fair representation. It's because unfortunately it seems the mass majority of people, like those points you were just mentioning at the beginning about how people are, particularly men, are orientated towards physical attraction that way. That's what we're going to keep making available to people, right?
Yeah, there's an element of like fairness. I understand that, where it's like we should be moving towards, especially when we look at these models like in Vogue and things like that, where it's like it's becoming unhealthy. Are we
Yeah.
looking at like models that are actually like not healthy, and they're seen as like the sort of epitome of like sex, but they're actually, it's unrealistic, it's unachievable, and it's like it's not actually the epitome of sex because it's not actually possible. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
is that an issue?
I'm not even thinking about that as an issue. Actually, I'm not thinking about the extreme. Oh, actually, well, you know, there actually are scenarios I think where that could be potentially damaging. I'm more thinking about just the general when it comes to what people consume now. Not even like models. I'm talking about like TVs. I'm talking about, yeah, sorry, like mainstream media. So TVs, films, adverts, guest shows. That's the type of thing where the people that you'll be seeing just don't represent the general public. You know, that
Sure.
you're right that there are certain cases where like we've almost warped what beauty is to such an extent. And what a good, I think probably a good opportunity to talk about that in terms of like when you do have examples of beauty that are literally unachievable. We can just look at the Kardashians, right? There are literally people that go to plastic surgeons these days and say, I want a Kim Kardashian bum. You know, it's like that isn't possible.
Yeah.
A human being cannot do that. But we now find ourselves in a climate where like some guys and a lot of girls think that's genuinely attractive. You know, somehow we've managed to warp what we consider to be beautiful beyond human capability now.
Yeah, that one probably is damaging, and you, I think that these companies like Vogue and like the Kardashians, they're like selling sex on like an extreme level, where it's like it has become like unrealistic, which it kind of baffles me a little bit that people still look at that and they see it as like supremely attractive, even though they know it's
Yeah.
like, even though they know it's not real. Having said that, when we talk about like selling sex, people just have like inherent prejudices towards attractive people, right? I mean,
Sure.
you look at
Sure.
two people, and if one of them is more attractive than the other, the person that's attractive just has like,
They're your type.
I just the it's like luck in a way that like you've kind of been blessed with like being attractive, and it's almost like what goes on is like better for you. You know what I mean? It's like I'm not sure how to like explain it, but like you're just kind of prejudiced towards people that are like more attractive, you know. So for example, if you're like a group of guys, like the most attractive guy will probably have had like slept with the most women and stuff like that. That will be seen as like
Mm.
a really
It's
dominant like
almost
trait,
standard, yeah.
like it's something that's like really good, and like a really attractive woman will have loads of like male suitors and stuff like that, and maybe she'll be more likely to get hired for a job, and like same for men. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, that is something which I think is damaging in itself. It's because there's definitely a perception of people that are naturally or unnaturally beautiful or a certain way or like attractive, and there's this perception of their lives being made easier to whatever extent. And like it's exactly like the stupid stuff you mentioned, like People at a shopping centre are less likely to get pissed off at you when they bump into you. They're just going to smile and be dazzled by them. You know, they're much likely to, when you're a boss, they're not going to fucking rattle you down if it's like an absolute stunner, or if it's a guy who's like fucking tall, dark, and handsome type of thing. There's definitely some concepts of like, people must think that life for these people is easier, and that's where I think potentially one of the problems comes in. It's because people want to emulate that. They want to have that degree of attention. It's because mind you, I mentioned that guy from high school that he like eventually fell down this rabbit hole, the rabbit hole that I think all of this starts with, and has where the terrible potential comes from. He was like naturally one of those people that was just very outwards looking. You know, he was constantly thinking about where he wanted to be. He was constantly thinking about other people. He always wanted to be popular. He wanted to be recognized. And one of the ways that he believed, subconsciously or consciously not, he believed that he would get recognition is by achieving beauty. And that's how we'll end up in scenarios where it's like, in order to get Kim Kardashian beauty, people know what to do now. You don't actually need to work on your body. You get surgery. You know, we are now encouraging people. The beauty standard is shifted to such a degree now that we are now changing people. People are feeling compelled to cosmetically change the own shape of their body at relatively young ages in order to try and like reinforce their own image. Like, this almost sounds to me like, has this something to do with like the standard of beauty changing, or are people getting more insecure? You know,
I think, well, as it's become more unrealistic, so you'll look at like, I think people probably have like a general idea over like time. There's like a spectrum of like beauty, and like everyone kind of falls into like the level of attractiveness. There's like, you get filed away. You know, we get filed away somewhere. There's like, 10 to like 1. You know, we get
sure.
every female we meet, or everybody that's like attracted to us that we meet, files us away somewhere neatly into that little bracket.
Mm-hmm.
And as the accessibility to these celebrities' lives, so as like TV and film have become like a thing, and you've now got a little window, and I kind of spoke about this before, where it's like almost like whereas before the TV came around, you were looking into your neighbour's garden and you were looking about your street, and you seen the standard of beauty there,
Yeah.
and you were like probably much higher on that standard of beauty
Relative.
than
Yeah.
now. Whereas you look at like through this little imaginary window in your living room that looks into movies, you see these women that are like stunningly attractive, and you go like down the list. And then now we've gone even a step further, where we have these little boxes in our pockets that
Mm-hmm.
look into the lives of people that don't even exist. Like, these people aren't even real. So the scale for like, you look at the scale from like 1 to 10, whereas before it would have been like a realistic scale. On that
It's like
scale,
going out to 15.
these people are now
Yeah.
at like 15, like Kim
Yeah.
Kardashian's at 15, but we still look at the scale as like 1 to 10. So like, we're now realistically, whereas we might have been a 5, we're now actually a 3, like
Sure.
into
Sure.
the perspective that we have.
Yeah. Once you normalize that.
So you're looking at these things and you're thinking, God, I'm nowhere near 10. Like, I'm dog shit. Like, I'm gonna have to do something about that. And you know, if maybe you can't work out anymore, or you don't want to put in the energy to like do it, or for whatever reason you're like not attractive, you start looking at the ways in which they've done it, and you're like, well, I could get cosmetic surgery and I can bump myself to a 6, you know. And it's like, that's good enough for me, and I'll be really attractive then, and all of a sudden my life will open up. And it's like, you can see how the ceiling has gotten so much further away, but people just think it's in the same place, and it's like really not, because you're not looking at like standards of beauty. You're looking at people that don't exist anymore.
Yeah. A fake person behind the screen. I think it's. I think that's right, because from what I see, as I said, like, this definition of beauty, it comes about through exposure. You know, it's like a cultural thing that's no one person decides it. I don't think it's just like you go through eras, and the eras end up manifesting certain body types that are particularly attractive, and that happens to be, you know, it tends to find like in the olden days, like you said, it'd be like James Bond. You know, the new James Bond would be the new man that a woman wants for a husband type of thing, or like the latest massive supermodel back in the 80s, that would become the latest, you know, version of attraction. People start wearing clothes based on that type of person. Now we're like constantly being exposed to a type of person that, like you said, is not a real representation of any single person. We're having this like what was once a standard of beauty is now becoming completely warped into something that's only there to design, only there to try and like boost money. You know, because the only reason that these like the Kim Kardashians do what they're doing is because they know that like standards of beauty will make you important. You know, crazy plastic surgery will make you more important. And the problem is that people are not able to realize that that's not a fucking human being. And that's what this whole weird. It's kind of like. So on the one hand, I thought to myself at the start of this, like, surely things are getting better because there's so much more awareness now, and like this has been an active issue that people are working on for a long time, trying to be representative, trying to be realistic. But at the same time, we have modern factors like the extent of like parasocial relationships that exist online with people that are not real, which is actually pushing people in the exact opposite direction. People want these things to be better, but it seems our human nature is naturally pushing us towards mega sex symbol icons in the exact opposite direction, and exposure is one of these examples. I think maybe another exposure, which must maybe manifest itself in a different way, just has to be how it feels like most pictures you see online now have a filter of some type. You know, the
Oh yeah.
accessibility that people have in order to tweak image and go to like video editors and, you know, like get rid of that crease there,
It's
get rid of
like
that
that's like free
blemish.
plastic surgery, you know.
Yeah, exactly, and it's like it's rampant, you know, from what I seem to understand anyway.
I'm not sure that human nature is the issue. I don't necessarily think, and again I'll come back to it where I'm like, people always want to change the wheel, but they never want to ask like why the wheel exists in the first place. So, like I wonder like why people have like prejudice towards attractive people. Is that like a good thing for like evolution, like survivability going forward? Is being attractive good in some way, shape, or form? I'm not sure. Does being attractive make you like a good mate for like somebody else, for example, like
Well,
procreating?
yeah, well, isn't it's the opposite of when when we talked about the obesity epidemic, isn't it? It's like something about your human monkey brain looks at another person that's overweight and says that, you know, for whatever reason, they might not be the optimal person for me to have kids with.
Hmm.
And surely it applies the exact same way to attractive people. It's like, you know, one of the classic representations of female beauty is like wide hips, which literally means that they will be more likely to survive childbirth, you know, because they're more easily past this
Yeah.
child. And like big boobs has got to do with like breastfeeding and stuff like that. Like there has to be, I guess that's where like the ultimate foundations of attraction come from. So it's like I think it like is a kind of a human nature thing. We can't ever separate ourselves from this need. And the same with guys. Like, I don't know if it's the same with guys actually to such an extent, because what we physically imagine is like attractive male traits is just like typically masculine, somewhat muscular, somewhat tall. I don't know if there's the same biological
Well,
drive behind
well, so
that.
I actually looked into one of these things before. I actually looked into why beards are attractive once,
Oh,
and it
okay.
turns out that beards, if a man has like a full-on beard, it's like a good sign that he can produce a lot of testosterone. So
Mm.
it's like an attractive quality to have because it means you've got like the correct hormones, sort of thing.
Hmm.
I don't actually think that looking at people and judging them on their attractiveness is like is the issue, because well, unless you start doing that for things that like for like a job, for example, if you look at someone and you like give them a job because of how attractive they are like physically, I'm like, I start to think it maybe breaks down a bit there, and I'm like, you kind of make that's like a bit unfair. But when we look at how attractive, like you see, like when I'm talking about the spectrum, I don't think the
Hmm.
problem is necessarily human nature. I think the problem is more to do with the fact that we are not built to deal with the advances in technology that we've experienced in the last 30 years, 50
Hmm.
years, 60 years. The human brain has evolved for so long under the interaction of like the people that you see, people in your street, like you're socially interacting with them.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden, over the last like, I don't know, 60, 70 years, it introduced this little box that you could like see people through, and your brain thinks these are the same social interactions. You know, like I'm seeing you
Exactly.
on a
Yeah.
screen right now and we're talking, but it's like when you watch a streamer, you see them on a screen and I don't think your brain knows how to
It can't
distinguish.
distinguish these things. No, it's
i
got,
don't
yeah.
i don't
It's
think
a
it can do that.
parasocial influence. Uh-huh.
So it still puts you on this like spectrum, as if like Kim Kardashian was your neighbor, as if like she's like roaming about your street even though she's like not. So it's like damaging you in a way that like your brain wouldn't normally function that way, but because there's
Right.
it's almost like a view in, imagine like Kim Kardashian lived on your street, and every house on your street had like Kim Kardashians in it.
I
Like
get it. Yeah.
you can see how that would you look at yourself, you'd be like, I'm fucking ugly as fuck. But
Sure.
you know, if you actually looked about your street, you would see that you're like totally normal. But you, because you're looking into this little box, you're seeing a bunch of neighbors that you don't have, a bunch of fake people that don't exist. You
Mm.
put yourself on this spectrum somewhere, and it's like you can see why you would feel pressure for something like that, because the guys, especially for women, guys are seeing that as well. They're looking at that and they're thinking that's the standard of beauty.
Yeah, that's the woman I want, type of
And
thing.
it's the same for guys when they're looking at like Chris Evans, for example, at the Avengers, and I'm like, God, like that's the standard of beauty. Like that's never going to happen. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's
It's
more
impossible, you know.
exactly, but I think the pressure is like higher for women in that regard, because like I look at Chris
Yeah.
Evans and I'm like, oh, I'll never be like that. But women probably look at like Kim Kardashian, like it probably puts like a good amount of stress on them. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I get. I shouldn't say it's human nature. Like you said, it's the way that human nature is incompatible with these new advancements that we see ourselves in, and I think so much of just this exposure of what we're doing, and like this really does nice tie in really nicely and well with parasocial relationships, because it's like almost like human beings just like a switch breaking inside their head. I I kind of wonder though, like we've got so we know that like these two advancements in technology, which like or a couple of advancements in technology which are like severely skewing people's understanding of what beauty is, and we've got like phone screens, we've got like filters on phone screens, and we've also got like plastic surgery. Like how will this change people in the long run? We're going to have a population that either feels that the people that either has like a higher standard of beauty than is actually present in the population. Like I'm not even
Mm.
talking about how this is a bad thing in terms of like mental health and how people might look inwardly. I'm just meaning like surely there'll have to be quite a shift in people's general nature. Like are people going to become like are relationships going to like be less common now? It's because people will have higher standards. You know, I have to, I can't help but feel that the degree of exposure we're having right now has to be huge.
Well, I mean, yeah, I feel like whatever it is, it must be bad because I spoke about we have like this inherent prejudice towards people that are like attractive, and I kind
Mm.
of think that's what's happening when you look at like your screen, when you look at a phone or a TV, and you see these like, for us when we see women, and it's like you know you look at someone like I don't know, for example, I'm like watch like Dua Lipa, for example, she's like an insanely attractive woman, like unrealistic standard. I'm like, obviously, my monkey brain is like looking at her and thinking, we could have a kid. Like, she'd be
Sure,
a great mate for me, and that's why like I'm
sure.
like sexually attracted to her.
Uh-huh.
You know, maybe that's just like it's damaging for like the relationships like around you. So, you know, for example, if you go out and get a girlfriend in your street, like all of a sudden, because your perception of attraction on the top level is so much higher than it used to be, your perception of the people that are around you are now like less.
Yeah, that's
And you're like looking at these relationships and you're thinking that you're like worse off, you know, because, and it sounds horrible to say, but is the fact that these people are so unrealistically attractive diminishing the attraction that you'd feel for someone who is normal,
yeah.
you know?
Well, that's what I can't help but wonder. Like, see people in our like grandparents' time, they wouldn't have seen someone like like these characters, like a Kardashian or like whatever you think is a standard of beauty. You know, they literally would not have seen it in their lives. They would have like had the most pretty girl in the town, and she would have been a fucking belter. You know, these days that pretty girl is still a really pretty girl, but it's not the same as a celebrity, which is like been through crazy amounts of surgeries, that has like a team that are doing them up, that has like 1 in a billion chance of genetics having to manifest in a specific way. So it's that's where I can see there being like real potential issues. And the thing is as well that we know that they're actually, we have an opportunity to look at some of the ways that having like radical shifts in your standard of beauty can lead to really detrimental effects. And well, okay, I'll go into it a little bit, because basically when I was reading about this like whole concept of standard of beauty, it turns out like that's why I mentioned at the start I want to talk about specifically the Western standard of beauty. It's because obviously this is like like beauty across the world is like highly different between different cultures, and it has been throughout time, and going from one decade to the other, it's a completely different fucking kettle of fish. So I had to kind of like lock it down into one thing. And when I was looking up Western standards of beauty, I basically tended to find that there were tons and tons and tons of threads. It seems like quite popular right now to talk about how the Western standard of beauty is inherently racist. And that is a logical thought, because as I said at the beginning, like most people, you know, back in the early 2000s that we saw in positions of like traditional beauty were like tended to be white, tended to be skinny, like they were clearly British at one point, you know, or American. And the theory is that this all goes back to when basically the British colonized the majority of the world. Part of what they also colonized was standards of beauty in the countries that they ended up taking over, and that was literally part of the culture that they ended up, you know, taking. And when we talked about colonization, this effectively was a form of colonization, changing the cultural ethos when it comes to thinking about attraction. And to get me onto one of these examples of where how changing that idea can be really, really dangerous to a population happened in like India, because like even to this day, thousands of women and men as well like use these like horrible off-license skin bleaching products, because they basically, in their culture, lighter skin is considered more attractive, you know. So like we have people that are being born a completely natural way they are, and from day one of their birth feeling that they are not what beautiful wants, and it leads them to be using these products that end up being really dangerous, and because it's like you know, it's just a horrible thing, and people that dye in their skin and that type of thing. Another really, really obvious example is how in Korea we've got, like, you know, you get Western eye surgery, which is like they get rid of,
Oh
like, you know,
God,
they
yes.
literally will like in Korea a standard of beauty is a double eyelid. You know, that's something that Asians naturally don't have. Now we're talking about like Kim Kardashian's arse, like they don't have double eyelids, but that is now what in their media is considered attractive, and that's why like cosmetic surgery is like so massive in these countries. And like I can only I just feel that pushing people in these directions where they feel they have to like physically change like skin color or eyelids, it just has to be so damaging eventually in terms of like confidence or insecurity, or I don't know, man, but it just seems like bad news, and we're definitely heading in that exact same direction, it feels like.
The pure like advancement in technology over like the last 100 to 150 years seems to have done like, it seems to have had so much good, but it also
Mm.
seems to have had a lot of like unforeseen damage that it doesn't seem like a lot of people are like talking about either. Like
Yeah,
people
yeah.
talk about
Mm-hmm.
no representation like beauty standards, and they understand that like the people are like unattainable that they are seeing, but they're not. I don't think
They're not
people
asking why.
they're not
Mm-hmm.
asking like the real questions where it's like there have been like thousands and thousands of years of like human evolution that we've gone through before we could even like travel to like another country, you know, before you could leave the tribe, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And because technology has advanced so quickly in such a short space of time, people just like aren't like catching up. And it's another one of these things we speak about social media. Like that's my big two gripes right now: money and social media,
Yeah, yeah.
where it's like it's just doing damage that we have no idea. And by the time social media has been around for 100 years, it's going to be like irreversible. You know, people are
Oh,
going to
too
be
late. Mm-hmm.
absolutely fucked. You
Yeah.
know, and we're seeing things like, and I'm sure there's a vast majority of like other reasons for this as well, like divorce rates going up, like
Mm-hmm.
families not staying
Mm-hmm.
together, like single parents, stuff like that. I wonder how much like these unrealistic standards are contributing to the fact that people don't want to be together, or like their relationships don't last very long, or like, you know, you see, like, for example, if I've got a girlfriend and like she sees like Chris Evans and Chris Hemsworth on the Avengers movie, and she's looking at me and she's like turning up her nose, and she's
Yeah.
like, "You're fucking stinking," and I'm like,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm sitting
yeah.
there picking my nose, like, "Oh, okay, all right,
Not me.
you coming
Yeah,
back
yeah.
tomorrow?"
That must lead to problems, you know, in relationships. I think you're right. I think there must be ways that this manifests in our relationships. And dude, it's what we fucking it is literally. It does feel like you're right. There's so many things in the world right now that are accepted. For instance, like one of them is that people want to see more social. People want to see more representation. People want you to use less social media and that type of thing. But it's only after you and I can sit here and talk about it for an hour do we ever get round to talking about that and realizing it? There's just so much complexity literally related to these two things: fucking money, fucking social media, man. Every single episode, what it seems to me, it's what it eventually boils down to. And well, that's another thing we say every single episode as well. It's so difficult to just wrap your head around how different our lives are compared to every other human being born before us, before in the last, thousands of years compared to the last 20. We're having introducing things around us in our every single day lives that have to have really, really long-term side effects, and people just keep looking forward and not really being aware of what that's doing in any deep way. That's probably got something to do with money as well, like business. For instance, social media don't want you to ask, is social media potentially a bad thing? They just want you to keep using social media.
It's just the fucking kids that are using it. So they're not going to ask they're going to ask deep questions, are they?
Yeah, that's right. And they'll be indoctrinated for the rest of their life. Like by the time they're 20, they won't ask why people aren't using social media. It's because it's what they've been used since they were a child,
Yeah. I mean, when I look at like social media and I see these unrealistic standards of beauty, I think we have to be like, you have to look at these celebrities, the Kardashians. You have to look at all these celebrities you see in the movies, Jennifer Lawrence, Dua Lipa, all these like mega sexy stars. There has to be an element of you that just like sits down for a second and like looks at the dissonance between real life and like these people, and you have to I don't know how you could even like tell your brain to do this, but you have to be like, that's not real. This is like fiction sort of thing. You have to like look at it and almost like tell yourself that like, you're not attracted to it. You have to be like, this is like like
slapping your dick down. Bad.
Yeah, every time you look at it and you think, oh, she's sick, just like slap you. There's like a slap, like shock therapy or something.
Yeah.
But you have to like,
I don't know, man.
Look at it and see the dissonance between that and real life, and understand that this is like something that just like doesn't exist. Because look at Chris fucking Evans and I'm like, that cunt's on roids, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
exactly. he's jacked out as nut.
And you look at every one of these fucking women we see as well, man.
Yeah, and look at the Kardashians and it's like, yeah, your arse does not look like that because it's not fucking real,
It's not possible.
You have to like look at these things and like try to understand that. I don't know, and just like look at like the broader picture almost, and see, turn around to your girlfriend or boyfriend tonight and think about how attractive they are, instead of like looking at Kim Kardashian and thinking your arse isn't like that, is it?
Yeah,
because that's just not realistic in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah, I kind of feel that like I just wish that people were able to like create a bigger divide between people's perceived value and beauty. It seems like one of those things. I don't believe it's possible. I think that humans are unfortunately hardwired to like correlate those directly with each other, but I do wish that there was less emphasis on that. People just start appreciating like, you're born the way you fucking are born, and like, be proud of that, please. Like, see, that's the thing that always gets me about modern beauty standards as well. You're just homogenizing your look. You're moving towards someone else's, man. Like, I genuinely believe it. I've said it for years now. Like, see, the things that make you unique are the things that make you beautiful. I know that's like a bit fucking preachy, but I genuinely believe that now, man.
Nah, you've gone off the deep
pisses
end.
me off. No, I've been saying it for years, man. Honestly, I think it's a joke.
I honestly agree. Like, because one of the things that I've always been most, I say proud, one of the things I've most liked about myself is the fact that I had ginger hair. And it's always been like a great thing for me because it's always been unique. And when I was at when you're at school and you get made fun of for stuff, like people always made fun of me for being ginger, but like I was quick-witted enough to come back with something so that they would leave me alone.
That might have helped you make you quick-witted as well.
It probably did, but I was also never bothered by it because it was always a good thing in my life. Like I've never, I guess, especially in high school, I put a lot of pressure on like what women thought about me, and like having ginger hair was like never a negative. I don't believe there's ever been a girl in my life that's like turned me down because I have ginger hair. You know what I mean? But there's probably been plenty of girls that have like spoken to me or I've gone up to and they spoke to me because I do have ginger hair. It's like, I think it's an attractive quality and it's always something that I've like enjoyed. A point of pride, I guess.
but even then, that's the thing. Like, it's something that you personally are proud of. If a girl did come to say you don't like ginger hair, you tell her to fuck off, you know, because like that's something
Sure.
that you are proud of. It's one of those things that there may be like more of an emphasis on just looking internally and less looking outwards. You know, stop aspiring to be something that you are and try and work on what you are in the first place. You know, I'm not telling you not to get muscles. I'm not trying to find like dress yourself up or put on makeup or whatever like that. Look as best as you can, but just be aware that we are living in a world that's playing with your brain, and you're not on a playing ground anymore. You're not going to go out to the club on a fucking Saturday night and find, you know, Jennifer Lawrence standing at the bar.
Oh, yeah.
So, if only. Fingers crossed.
I guess
Nightclubs are open.
He'll be in Bristol in 2 weeks' time. Yeah, might find her.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Jennifer.
it probably also do something for you to like unfollow Jennifer. It would probably also do something for you to like unfollow these people on like social
Sure.
media. If you're like, if you find yourself like looking at like Chris Evans or Kim Kardashian, and you're like viewing their profile a lot, and you're actively looking at their profile all the time, like it might do something for your like mental health and well-being to like just remove yourself from that. Like take yourself off of Instagram and off of Facebook or whatever, and like see what that does for you for like a wee while. That might be something to like consider as well.
Yeah, exactly. Because that is the key to what we're talking about. As much as I'm talking about filters and plastic surgery and like perceptions, that type of thing, it is just the way that you look at other people. And the less that you do that, the less you're going to be influenced by it. And at this stage, I'm kind of believing that just focusing on the real and what's in front of you, and face-to-face conversations with like friends, family, and people that you meet is just absorbently more healthy than devoting so much of your life to this virtual environment. It's not fucking real.
I think that's going to be the next wave of like mental health correction, where it's going to be like getting people off of like things like social media, getting them away from their phone screens, from things that like looking through, like I say, looking through this little window in your house that takes you to a magical place that like doesn't exist.
That's not real.
That can't be good for your health. It can't be.
Man.
It's not natural. It's not an environment that we are used to in any way, shape, or form. Like it's already such a big change to be able to drive through to, like, you know, from where I live to Glasgow is like 30 miles, you know. Think about a couple of 100 years ago, that would not have been possible. You know, we'd have been stuck, we'd have been in this town, and that would have been your like standard. Now you can actually go anywhere in Scotland, and that's your beauty standard. Like you go to Glasgow, and it's like, well, the women are attractive here, and it's like, well, yes, because there's fucking 5 million of 500,000 of them. Sorry, and it's like, so, you know, you're looking at your phone, and you're like, you're essentially a window into 3.5 billion women. You know, it's like. and some of them don't even exist.
yeah, exactly. Some of them are completely fabricated. It's no fucking wonder we're all screwed up in the head, man. It's not our fault. But yeah, that's. I'm glad we did talk about that, man. Just because beauty standards. Never thought that'd be an interesting one, right?
Yeah. Well, you surprise me every day, Lewis.